So everything's looking like it's in place. So yay. So yeah, we're just gonna flow today. Again, I don't have anything planned, but I know that the Holy Spirit will give me what to say and how to say it. But let's kind of briefly, or not briefly, but let's kind of just start at the beginning. So our last live teaching was, it was a while. Let me look at the calendar. Today is the 22nd. So our last live teaching was on the 8th, and we were talking about the modesty myths and opinions. And even like researching that was it was fun in a way. I learned a lot, and like again, I'm still like researching, and there's some things that I want to like read more of and kind of have like more like a well-rounded perspective of what other perspectives are saying. So yeah, there's just a lot of studying that takes place with kind of these live teachings and things, just to be, you know, ready, prepared, but then also to like just have a diverse conversation where it's not one-sided by all means. And you know, the purpose of these live teachings is to show you what's out there, right? To show you how everything's interconnected, to show you how even like the simplest things can be used as a way of deception and manipulation to like morph you into thinking of things as harmless or things like that, but really on the back end it's doing the most harm. And so yeah, it's just having to also research, you know, different perspectives, research different things that are going on. And so that's what today's live teaching is. Going to talk about kind of like the current events. But I feel like to kind of start with the previous live teachings all the way up until now. So all the way up until now, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh my gosh. So we've had 9 live teachings. Now 2 of the live teachings, so 2 out of the 9 were for the Journey series, so the Journey to Modesty series. I am still going to do that. I have a direction in which to do that. Where originally it was going to be, you know, once a month we would cover one of the sections of the series. And I'm still going to do that. I just think that there's more of an updated and elevated plan with that. And so I have uploaded the 2 that I have done so far on YouTube and also on this Facebook page. However, yeah, I think there's just a bit of tweak of direction with that, but still going to be a full series, still going to have full things that come with that. Excuse me, let me turn off my phone. Just the direction has changed just a bit from what I originally, you know, was thinking and kind of looking at earlier this year. So out of that, if we subtract those 2, because I mean, they are teachings, right? But they're more like guided teachings to kind of like walk you through what those phases and things look like. So with those being more guided teachings, I wouldn't call them necessarily like the type of teachings that I'm referring to. So if we subtract those, and there's 7, right? So 7 solid teachings of different aspects of, again, using fashion, because we are a fashion brand, so fashion is the vehicle. However, it's being used as a form of liberation, and showing you, highlighting the issues of not just fast fashion, but fashion in general, because the fashion industry, if you take the fashion industry, right, as a whole, and then you like think of it like a coconut, right? So the fashion industry is like this solid coconut, but when you open it up, right, the coconut has the things inside. So the things inside that coconut, or the industry, so to speak, would be all of like the supply chains, all of the other industries within fashion that work with fashion to make it what it is and what you see. So you have marketing, you have distribution, you have manufacturing, I mean, there's so many. And then even in those industries, then you have smaller industries and things. that all work, right, to make fashion what it is. So, and in order to really have fashion, you have to have an economy, right? You have to have an economy that supports it. Not just like, yay, we love clothes, but no, like there are economic things that have to be in place to support the industry of fashion. So it kind of reminds me of when I went to France to study abroad, right? I did a study abroad for the summer, and I did a sustainable business program, and then I also did a luxury brand management. And so I thought, like, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about clothes. And it did talk about clothes, but it talked about fashion. We learned the history of luxury brands, and of course a lot of like the starter of luxury and things like that. It is related and deep rooted in fashion, right? Because that's where it started. And so when you go back to the history of it, when it was with royalty and things like that, like fashion was, yes, everyone had clothes. Like even the poor had clothes, but their clothes were different, right? So really like couture, avant-garde, like, you know, like the things you see on runways, and like from the houses, and from, when I say houses, it's like fashion houses. So in France, there are rules and regulations for those brands to be named fashion houses, right? There's certain things that they have to have. And so like they're the names like Louis Vuitton, Dolce & Gabbana, Hermes, like there's so many, right? They're all generational and household names. But when you go back to like the root of it, it started with fashion, right? So some of them are in luggage, some of them are in handbags, jewelry. I mean, now they've completely expanded. So like now they're making and selling just about everything, right, to encompass the whole customer. But it all started and rooted in fashion. And so back then, the kings and like the royals, and also the people within the aristocrats and what they call socialites now, right? All those elite people had an excess, right? And especially the kings, right, that were over France at the time. They loved excess. And so fashion is like couture, which has evolved fashion in the fashion industry, was rooted in excess. And if you don't know what excess is, it's like having a lot of something. So it's having the choice, but not only the choice of being grand and extra, but over the top of extra, and just being plain right greedy in a way, right? Where it was a way to show off their wealth and show off everything that they had. So that's what it was rooted in. It was rooted in vanity, right? And excessiveness. And those are the words that they actually used in France. So I'm not adding words. Those are the words they used. Like that was the thing. Like, yes, it had to go over the top. It had to be magnificent. It had to be immaculate. It had to be elegant. So that's why you see like when I learned in luxury brand management that luxury is not just clothes, right? It's cars, it's shoes, it's the coffee shop. So like when you go to France, especially Paris and other parts of France, like, but especially Paris where I was in, I mean, your coffee shop, right, has beautiful architecture and paintings on the ceiling. Like, it was like every part of their life was in excess and in luxury. So just imagine, like, you know, the mansions you see, right, where they have like the rare marble floorings, and like every room was in excess, and opulence is another word. So they used opulence a lot, where it's just opulence, exuded opulence, where it was just like over the top grand. And so every part of their lives were luxury, especially to royalty. So you think about all the industries, and also makers, artisans, skilled specifically for those things that are grand, and that are excessive, right? And so that then created an economy to be able to support that. Because, I mean, you have, right, the king, you have the royalty, then you have all of the elite and aristocrats and things like that, and then you have the makers, the people that then make that industry to be able to give what is required, right? So if the king wants a big temple constructed, well, you're gonna need an agency or someone or something to find the constructors, to find the makers, to find the person that hand carves, you know what I mean? Like all of those things. And then also what that does is also builds more trades. So you are going to need the person and that person to train other people to like carve out figurines and just all of the like opulent and like grandeur things you can think of. So that is where, fashion is rooted in, right? That's where you see the over-the-top designs. That's where you see the jewels. That's where you just see the grandeur of things, because it came from France and it came from royalty. They had money, they had resources, they had power, and they wanted to show off that power. They wanted to show off those resources. They wanted to show off that money. That was their thing. So every part of their life was of opulence. Every part of their life was grand. And they spared no expense. And so seeing with that, that also meant that, of course, that they made that, since, you know, they had that power, they then made that a part of the economy within France. So when you think about the way things are done, commerce, markets, things like that, the bartering system, like all of that stuff had to work together to then form an economy that continues to allow those practices of excessiveness and grandeur to happen, right? So like again, you have the makers, you have the artisans. I mean, when you're flying in fine silk from China, and you know what I mean, you have the transportation. So there's so many industries and there's so many areas and so many things that kind of touch the hands of the things that they wanted to be able to make it so that they could have what they're asking for. So that is what I'm showing you also in these live teachings, is all of these little things that we don't really think about, we know exist but don't really think about and don't know how they all work together. And so yeah, that's how fashion started. And to me, it was interesting because if you've ever been to France, the French are very proud people. They're very proud of their heritage. They're very proud of their history. And so, you know, even in talking about maybe the things that weren't so good, that happened, there's still like pride with that. There's no shame. Like they'll say like, oh yeah, maybe that wasn't good, but that doesn't negate the pride that they have for their country and their heritage, which I can admire. They'll stand still 10 toes down, you know what I mean, for anything French. So, yeah, I learned a lot about luxury brand management, how luxury brands are formed, how these household names are formed. I mean, they've been around for generations, right? Centuries. I mean, you know, Hermes and Louis Vuitton and all these other brands, especially French brands, have been around since the kings and the queens of back in centuries past, right? And of course, it's kind of like the show Bridgerton, which it's so funny because I have a workshop I'm working on in regards to that, but it's almost like Bridgerton, right? So they have weathered the storm of economy, right? So since there has been an economy, right, not just only within France, but then you have India, who has textiles, China, who has the fine silk. Like, so you have all these other countries that have culture, and their cultures is built around the clothing they wear, and also in reverence to the clothing that they wear. It reverences the architecture, but then also just the craftsmanship that comes with creating these garments, creating what they wear, how they treat their textiles, you know, all the things like that. And also the intricate process to even to get silk the way it is, right? There's an intricate and detailed process to even do that. So there's an immense amount of labor under all of this that's really not talked about, right? The invisible labor that no one sees, no one really cares. I just want the finished product. And so yeah, so then these other countries are then building up, their economies is being built up in terms of textiles and fashion too, because then you have these kings and these aristocrats and these powerful people that are like, oh, I went there and I love that and I want that. And so then that country then gets, that profit, gets that investment of money, and then is able to then build an economy around textiles, around fashion, to be able to produce. And so I think that's also why we in the US don't really have such a strong economy in fashion anymore. It's completely, almost, I won't say erased, but it's hanging on by a fine thread, right? Yes, we did have an industrialized economy and things like that. Yes, there was those kind of things, but like when I think about the luxury brand management, the sustainable business, and even in growing up in high school and things like that, and you learn about the Boston Tea Party, and you just learn about different things that happen in history, though the recounts of history could be, a little eggy and a little bit off, depending on whose perspective that we're getting that information from. But when I think about all those things, you always think about, I've always thought about the culture, right? I can't remember what it's called. I always said I wanted to be a veterinarian as a child, only because, now hear me out. I only said that because growing up in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, you couldn't say nothing creative. You want to say, I want to be an artist, or I want to be a painter. They'd be like, you need to find something that's going to make you some money. Right? So that's not something that you could say and kind of get away with. So I always said veterinarian, because I'm like, oh, well, it's kind of like a doctor, but it's like a pet doctor, right? And I didn't even like pets like that for real. I like wild animals, and I like National Geographic, watching them on National Geographic, but I didn't even really like pets like that for real. Because I sure didn't like big dogs. I really liked really small dogs. I don't like cats for real. But I just said that because I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a doctor. It's for animals. It'll be an acceptable career if someone asked that, but I really know I wanted to do fashion, right? And so, yeah, so depending on who I talked to is who I said what career, right? But also, I knew deep down that I never really told anybody, but I knew for myself that I was like, well, if fashion works out, if it doesn't, whatever, I still want to be an anthropologist, right? So I wanted to study anthropology. I loved history class. I remember I took AP history in high school. We had to fight to get in there because they was acting eggy, but I loved history class. I understood the context in which the history was being recounted, so that wasn't a remiss to me. That wasn't lost on me. I understood that. However, just even having that part of history recounted allowed me then to do my own research, and also just imagine from the other side of what life could be like. And so I really love studying different cultures and how their cultures and values. I just really love I love it. And so I can see how, even though technically, I'm doing fashion, it still intersects with anthropology, right? Studying the cultures, different cultures. Because when you think about fashion and you think about textile production, manufacturing, it's intersected with a lot of different countries. So you have a lot of different cultures, and a lot of these countries that have the economic capacity for textile production, for fashion, for the things that most of the fashion industry, especially designers and brands, are pulling from and using them for labor or a part of their supply chain, is because they had that rooted economic, not only capacity, but then they also had inundated textiles, clothes as a language, as an expression of their culture within their countries, within their, their many cities and nations, and how that, all that intersects. That was a part of it. That was a language, that was an expression. And also that was reverenced. How they went about even making the textiles, whether growing it from the ground, and that whole process, and all the laborious process of most of the stuff was hand sewn, hand knitted, knitted by hand, threaded by hand. There's a lot of you know, things that were beaded all by hand, and just the beautiful work and craftsmanship that was done by hand, which required a lot of labor. And so, yeah, they've just been able to keep that infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is in place, you can sustain it. Now, of course, throughout time, there's pivots and things like that. So you have to, you know, pivot, see what the market is doing, things like that. But they've been able to sustain it. And so that's kind of where we are now with where I am now, also with studying these things, is because it's like, oh, it's actually kind of part of anthropology, because I'm learning the different cultures and how they do things, how they look at fashion, how they look at textiles, how they look at clothes, how they reverence it, how they produce it by hand, their processes, the amount of labor and kind of love and passion that goes into it, because it's inundated within their culture. So it's pretty cool to see, but it's also kind of just showing you like the different aspects and different avenues that merge all of this together to then be something that you see on TV that you want, or something that you scroll on social media and you're like, I gotta have. So that has been like the thing for me, is just reflecting on that, and then also reflecting on all of that and like where we are now. Because as I said, these luxury brands, some of these brands and household brands have been around since, you know, the kings of old, right? Centuries. I mean, they have been around to see multiple kingdoms fall, nations and countries being conquered. They have seen many of the Great Depressions. They have seen many economic collapses. They have seen death and disease. They have seen all these things. They have seen murder. They have murdered. You kind of think about Bridgerton, of like the back end of when you see how they're I call them familial infrastructure. So a lot of them have these familial infrastructures where, yeah, they are marrying off, you know, their sons and daughters to other powerful families, to then join those together, to then be able to expand and have more territory and power. And so all that kind of stuff is going on in the back end, right? And it still is going on. I don't think people, they just think about it as like a fantasy, or like, oh, like that's history, but it's still going on today. It's a bit more modernized in some areas. Other areas, it's still like how it was in those times. And so seeing how all of that kind of laid the groundwork for where we are now, and how fast fashion has taken over, it's changing a lot of that dynamics. A lot of the countries that had the economic capacity to sustain textile production, to sustain a level of craftsmanship and crafters, creators, and cultivate that kind of culture, all that stuff is disappearing now with fast fashion, because it's more industrial. So it's very fast, quick turnaround times. And so, you know, most of within the production, it costs a lot of money to produce, right? But when you're on the back end only getting a shirt for $8, that means that someone on the back end of the supply chain that made that is not getting paid. Most likely the crafters and the sewers, but then also the people that handle the supply chain, distribution, things like that, aren't getting paid their worth either. And so, yeah, I think back then they knew the price of how much it would cost, and I think that's also why a lot of the kings and stuff, they paid whatever. It didn't matter how much it cost, because they understood what they were asking for was worth it to them. That they spared no expense to have it, because they also understood the labor. They also understood the various hands that touch and that do the very thing that they're asking for. So whatever it costs to make, it was of no problem or issue. And I think that's kind of what's missing currently in the industry, is because, you know, you get a shirt for $3, $5, you can get a whole collection of clothes for under $400, and so we've lost kind of the connotation of value of how much, and the true value of clothes, because there's so many shortcuts being taken within the production and within the supply chain of how textiles and things are made, the clothes that we wear. The finalized product, that's all we see, but we don't see the back end. And so there's a lot of shortcuts being taken on the back end where people aren't getting paid, right? So to where it was a high price, you had to pay a high price and a high dollar for what it was. Now you don't have to pay that. Well, that also means that there's some things getting cut out, right? There's also means that where things were made of and don't get me wrong, because they still had some messed up practices even back then of like how they made clothes, and they still put chemicals on it. But a lot of that stuff, how it was made, especially like the silk and stuff, like you couldn't get, silk for a cheap cost. Like there was a high cost to that, and so there was a value attached to it, where now we don't have that value attached to it, and people feel like clothes should be affordable. Clothes were never meant to be affordable. That's not how fashion was created, to be affordable. And so I think you trying to take, like we talked about in the live teaching, everything has a root and an origin. So I think that is what's missing from the conversation that I see in today's topics, is we're not talking about the root and origin of how things are made. And so then we're taking something and trying to slap another label on it and completely remove and sever the root and origin for something from those things, when the intent, the root and origin and how it's made is how it's going to perform. No matter what label you put on it, no matter what you might change and shift, and it's still going to perform the very intent that it was made to do. You know what I mean? Like that's what's missing from the conversation. That's what's missing from, the whole buy secondhand. And don't get me wrong, thrifting secondhand is I can see the intent in the business model, but that's not going to save the earth. That's not going to reduce consumption. That's not going to be, I know, switching into more of this talk, is recently I've seen people really pushing secondhand as being the thing that's going to save the fashion industry, and I just don't believe that is my personal opinion, and I'm going to tell you why. Because let's just break down how clothes are made, right? So let me just get some water. Okay, so we're going to break down how clothes are made. So if you think about fast fashion, right? Most of those clothes are made from mixed fibers. So when we talk about mixed fibers, we're talking about polyester. So polyester isn't real, right? It's man-made. So it's comprised of mixed fibers. So taking different fibers, using a whole bunch of chemicals to then make something. So that's why they're cheap. That's why they break. Most of the chemicals that are being used are called like forever chemicals. So they're very toxic chemicals that you don't want nowhere near you, right? Nor do you want it on your body, because your body is the biggest organ that you have, and your body soaks up everything, right? It goes straight to your bloodstream. And so, these chemicals that they're putting in it are harsh. The harsh chemicals, and they also last forever. Let's also talk about, and their statistics, I won't get into them because I'll have to look them up, which I could, look them up also, because I just was looking at it this week. But I am going to post a post on the page called Dupe Culture, and I'll have some statistics on there. But it said like under 2% of clothes that are like, donated really get recycled into new clothes. But mind you, fast fashion, textile, it's called textiles. Textiles fashion industry accounts for, I think, more than 10% of the CO2 emissions, which is like the chemicals and the gas of landfills, all that stuff like that. So it is a heavy producer of toxic chemicals, of toxic waste. It takes, I think it was like for a shirt or a pair of pants, it takes, I forgot what, let me look it up. Let me just look it up so I can make sure. It takes 1,800 gallons of water to produce a pair of jeans. That's equivalent to about 7,500 liters. And this also includes the amount used for cotton cultivation, manufacturing, and other processes involved in the production of denim. The water consumption in the textile industry is significant and highlighting the environmental impact of fast fashion. Here's another article. This article is in 2024. Where they're saying this article, because it could have gone up, and it also kind of depends on what jeans, things like that, but it's saying about 2,900 gallons of water, and it says that that's the amount of average of water a person drinks in about 5.5 years. So if you break down what the gallons of water is, again, it was like the cutting, the sewing, the dyeing, the washing, the finishing, all that kind of manufacturing stuff is part of it. And so that's just water, right? We're not talking about power. We're not talking about waste. And then even when you get to like the cutting, sewing, and drafting, so you have to think about the thread being used, right? A lot of that is mixed fibers as well. So it's like nylon, there's nylon thread. There's a lot of other plastic threads, right, that could be used. You think about once things are like cut, and you kind of have to like put everything on the pattern to cut it, to then sew it together. So when you think about that, there's a lot of waste with that, because if they're not cutting or have cut strategically in a way, or even like just done their pattern making in a way that will reduce the waste, meaning the amount of fabric, the yardage of fabric being used, and there's extra fabric that's not being used that then are just thrown out as scraps, right? So there's just so much waste within the industry that is wreaking havoc on this world. Let me get the statistic for landfills, because I actually did a post. It is on the page. It's kind of a twist to this, you know how we have the 7 wonders of the world. So I did like the 7 wonders of the world landfill edition, because there are the top 7 fast fashion like landfills used around the world to discard fashion. That is including clothes donated. So I know that people think also with Goodwill and all these centers are like, oh yeah, we're going to donate these clothes. When you think about what I talked about, how things are made with mixed fibers. So anything that's a mixed fiber that's not 100% cotton or 100% wool, things like that, they will not be able to be recycled, meaning you can't break it down to then make it into something new. So because they're not able to be recycled, and because they're made of cheap quality, they have to be discarded. They're pretty much trash. So they're already trash on arrival. So the moment it's made, it's already trash. It's just decorated trash. That's pretty much what you're wearing. They can't do nothing but dump it, right? Also with these, and they can't break down in a landfill. So it takes about over 200 years or more for it to really break down. And for some of these things that are made with the fabric chemicals, they never break down. Well, when you think about them dumping it into landfills, and I mean, when I say they're piles, they're just piles of clothes. If you go to that post, it should be like actually right under, a couple posts under this live, you'll see like just a pile of clothes. Well, when you think about, you have these forever chemicals, you have these harsh chemicals that are in the clothes, right? They never die, right? They never die. They never go anywhere. Well, where do they go? Now, if they're talking about it being dumped in a landfill in a different country, a third world country, outside of the U.S., we do have some landfills here in the U.S. as well, but the majority of them are in Africa. So the top one was in Ghana. Another top country within Africa was Tanzania, and then Kenya. Also China, because they have a big recycling plant, and India and Nepal. So those are like the top countries where they have these landfills. When I say they're just pounds and pounds of clothes, and the one in India just has, clothes, it has plastic waste. These landfills also have like medical waste. So you think about other industries, they have waste too, and like where does that waste go? Yeah, they ship it off to another country and dump it. And so all these chemicals then are just sitting. Again, they don't break down. They never break down. So all it can do is just spread. So then you think about it being in a landfill, then now it's eroding the soil. Now it's causing issues with the soil. Now with the soil, if it rains, if anything happens, now it's getting into the water surfaces. I mean the water. And so now it's corrupting and or making the water toxic. So now that they don't have fresh water, like I saw some of the rivers, and it's interesting that most of the landfills were not only by cities, right? And cities where there's people and inhabitants. So they're not like these far off landfills far away from society. No, they're right in the middle of cities. Not only are they by cities, but most of these landfills that I saw, they're by large bodies of river that city uses, you know, for everything that they need. And so not only are they spreading disease now, because you think about animals, it talked about how a lot of animals, the cattle, the vermin, all of them eat what is in the landfill. So they're all eating trash. So just imagine like the full cycle of how all of this is just creating more issues, right? More issues, more problems. And so secondhand doesn't really work, because I mean they buy secondhand anyway, because what happens is there's like a dealer that sells, it's like a middleman. So once you take it to a donation, they then sell it to like a dealer, right, or agency that then sells it to the government or sells it to another dealer that is overseas in these countries. They dump it in the landfill. The locals in the landfill then are given agency to rummage through it to find the goods, but they're also like, you know, hearing firsthand account stories in some of these interviews, they're like, the clothes aren't of good quality. So, you know, we're getting bales, which bales is like truckloads, right? So they're having these truckloads of clothes being dumped, but they're not of good quality, because of course, like, all these clothes are not being made of great quality. So they're like, they can't, you know, like it's just trash, you know, so they can't resell it. And so that's what you see in a lot of these countries when you visit them and you go to their markets, and you're seeing like clothes that, you know, you would see, or it's because they're reselling our, you know, our junk for them to make money, to feed their families. And that's also how a lot of countries, when I talked about in my first my second one, when we talked about fast fashion the first time, when we talked about fast fashion part 1, and I talked about how they are able to essentially bankrupt or shift the economics of a country and pretty much kind of bankrupt them, right? So in some of these areas, they're like the poorest areas. They're like what you call the slums, the hoods. They're the poorest areas because of what their government has allowed to do. I also learned that in these landfills, most of these landfills are free areas, meaning like free of taxes. So what happens is essentially they dump it there, but to really remove it, they would have to pay taxes on it. And so what they were trying to do is create these areas or zones of like free tax zones. And so that's why they're really able to dump. And then also like approval by government. And also just then, because I was like, well, why don't they just like, you know, remove it out of there, or like change the rules that they also have within these countries, rules and legislation to where like they can't move it. Like I forgot what it is, but it's not as simple as just taking it out, you know, removing it, because there's some things that are illegal when it comes to removing the trash and the discarded textiles from these areas. So it's not just an easy like, oh, just go there and remove it. It's not that easy. So yeah, it's interesting. It's brings a layer to the conversation of why I don't think secondhand will be like the savior of the fashion industry and the savior of the earth when it comes to fashion and doing textiles and doing sustainability in fashion. I think that it could be an avenue, absolutely, where innovation and things can be used in a way to bring things to life, for people to see the value in the clothes, and also to think about these purchases and things that they're making before they buy them, and not buying out of convenience or because they were influenced to, but really thinking about, okay, what is this made of? Because it's ridiculous that Zara, H&M, all these places, y'all selling 100% polyester, which is straight plastic, for over $200-$300. Baby, it's plastic. There's nothing you can do with that. I don't care if you give that to someone, it will not last. It will not be able to be breaking down. It will not be able to be turned into a new garment. It is straight trash. It's trash on arrival, pretty much. Like, that's why I call it glorified trash. Like, they have glorified trash. I mean, from like the trash that we eat to trash that we wear. I mean, to the trash that we're living in. Like, they have really turned trash into this luxurious, and also not even luxurious, but like thing you have to have. Like, influencing us to buy trash that they know brings more harm to the world, that they know doesn't break down, that they know will last past your lifetime and even your kids' lifetime and their kids' lifetime. They know that will continue to pollute and cause great danger, not only to us, but then also the earth. Like, they know all these things, and they also know that they are making trash. And making it at such a faster rate, but they don't care. And so, like, it's like we have to care. So I do agree with the corporation being held to a certain accountability and responsibility, but I also believe that the consumer has a responsibility as well. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like us expecting our government to look out for us. That's not what the government was created to do. The government is gonna look out for its own best interest to ensure that it's still illicit. It has the illicit power. So it's always going to be looking out in the best interest of itself. Yes, if it can then look out in the interest of other people within that same sector and within that same mindset of what it's set out to do, then it will do that. But it's us throwing our authority and throwing our position of power to other people and expecting them to uphold themselves to a standard that keeps us safe. And I just think that that's ignorant. I think that that's irresponsible and crazy. I don't know how else to say that. But I think that that's crazy. Like, for me to put my safety in your hands, it's crazy. For me to hold you to the fire to do what's right is kind of crazy to me. Yes, I would love that. However, there are other brands, there are other people that are doing that, and I feel like that is also my responsibility of seeking that out. Now, do I understand that, yes, how marketing and how things work and how, fast fashion has the industry, which means that they have like the buyer's right. So things are less for them. Making things are going to be less costly for them as opposed to an indie brand or as opposed to a smaller brand who has a smaller budget, things like that. Absolutely. So yes, things might be a little bit more expensive. There's so many layers within that. However, I think it's a responsibility on both parties, the producer and the consumer. I also think that if we talk about the layers and complexities, and I think I've kind of talked about it in the fast fashion part 1 and 2 of the live teachings that I've done on my page, but we'll definitely get into it this next live teaching of like behind the business, really taking you behind the business, because as I mentioned in my last teaching, there are 2 levels to business. There's doing business And then there's the business of doing business. Two different levels, two different things. And so when we talk about holding corporations accountable, holding government, like that is talking on the realm of business of doing business, right? You're talking about governance, you're talking about things like that. And I think oftentimes we are a lot more ignorant of what's going on, nor do we really know the business of doing business to really then to be able to hold them accountable. Because if we did know, we'd know that due to lobbying and due to all these things and how corporate has infiltrated our governance and our justice systems and have evaded responsibility, evaded accountability, evaded taxes, evaded all these things, and due to the lack of governance that we have, because governance costs, right? And so due to the lack of governance and the lack of investment to hold them accountable and keep them accountable, and then also due to bartering, due to, what is the other one? You know, when they be blackmail, but what's the other one when they be like, it's not blackmail, but corruption. There we go. Due to corruption, all those things like that, right? You know, having lawyers and having people in your pocket. Money talks. Money is a tool. I know that people think that sometimes money is the end all be all and I'd be happy if I had money. You really wouldn't, because it's a tool. And if you don't know how to use the tool, yes, you would be happy on a lower level, but your problems will still be the same. The thing with corporations, the thing with all these big people in these high places is they are enjoying their money because they know how to use their money as a tool. They know how to work the system. They know the loopholes. They know that money brings access. It brings you into rooms that you would never know existed. It brings you into a level of influence that you never know existed if you lived beyond below a certain tax bracket, right? It brings a level of access and a level of yes to you, where people will say yes, because again, there's an industry and economics infrastructure that supports that. When you think about, when I mentioned the kings and them wanting all these opulent things, there was people that were like, absolutely, and I'll give that to you. Those were the middlemen. They weren't just doing business, they were in the business of doing business, where they made sure that they created a market, that they helped build the infrastructure within the economy to keep that going. You know, I know they had lawyers. I know they had access to people in high places. I know that they were influencing government and influencing here and influencing there to make sure that still was running. And so, yeah, it's a tool, and most people don't know how to use it. And they don't know how to use it when you get into those places and spaces of governance, because those people have money, so they're not really worried about your money. The only reason why you're there is because of your money. It just gives you access to the room. Now you have to know how to navigate the room, right? And really, even if you did have money, that money wouldn't really be enough, because you're up against people that have more money, more power, not just by way of like capital, but resources, their network, who they're connected to, that familiar infrastructure. And familial infrastructure, and I guess I can do another live teaching on that and really breaking down that. And what that is not just family, right? Yes, there are some like family things, and when you think about elitism and things like that, of like and nepotism, where they like with college, right? Higher education was not created for poor people; it was created for rich people. Like, that's why internships and stuff being not being paid and things like that wasn't because they needed the money. They just needed the access. You know what I mean? It created a way of access. And also in that access created a pipeline, a consistent pipeline to continue to perpetuate the same result of, if you just go through this pipeline. That's why it's like in college and stuff, they say, if you just do this, then this is what the expected result. That's why, because they were creating their own pipeline of access to be able to continue to do the things that they needed to do and to bring their family along. So yes, there is familial structures, as in like blood family, relatives. But familiar structures is also partnerships, collaborations, strategic partnerships, strategic collaborations, because every partnership and collaboration is not always strategic. Sometimes it's just a necessity. Sometimes it's just proximity, right? But doesn't mean that it's super strategic, meaning like I sought you out, like this is moving like, chess and not checkers. It's all who's within your network that propels and moves things forward for you, right? So yeah, that's another live teaching, because we can get into that. But I say all that to say, I don't even know how I got into that. What was I saying before that? Yeah, the governance. So yeah, so that's really having to hold people in those types of power accountable. And honestly, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but again, those people don't really, they have a level of access that most people won't ever have. So that's something they're not worried about. And also they're only worried about their best interest, right? They're worried about what will continue to perpetuate the type of result that they're looking for, the type of expansion they're looking for. And also, I'm not saying a lot of those people, but some of those people also don't really have a conscience. Let's just be real. Because some of the things that they're willing to do, again, not all of them, but some people, the things that they're willing to do, and some of them can be bought with the price. And so when you're dealing with people who don't really have a conscience, who can be bought with the price, and who are imbalanced in that way, and who don't really have morals and respect for other people, and let alone themselves, or don't even live or be guided by morals, like, what are you really holding accountable? Like, how can you really hold them accountable? Because to them, there is no accountability. Like, if anything, they are the accountability. They are the enforcer. And so that's another layer of conversation of when I say, like, a lot of times we're calling for things to be at the accountability of corporations, which that is and that should be true. However, there's so many layers and nuances. And it brings me to, I did want to talk briefly about the Target situation, because I did see recent current news, the CEO stepping down because of sales, pricing of not holding on to the DEI promise. People think it's due to the boycott. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. And I think that's what I'll use as a Target example of what I just mentioned. I think there's various layers to the Target situation that also has nuances. Do I agree with what they did? No. However, I'm just a little tired again of us putting so much faith in, and one, like, these corporations kind of tell us their agenda, what they really want, who they serve, and how they choose to serve. And so with them giving us that information, I don't like how sometimes we want people that don't have our best interests at heart, meaning corporations, politicians, and things like that, to appear as if they have morals when they're really evil, so that we can buy from them, so that we can stand with them. So that's what I think of Target. I'm like, Target has shown clearly that they're not really attuned to what they say they are. I think also people, again, the business of doing business is different from just doing business. And I think consumers are only looking at corporations as doing business, and they're not looking at corporations are in the business of doing business. And so that whole DEI is not for Black people, because Black people do not really benefit from DEI as people think it is. DEI is really inclusive of not just people of color and cultures, it's people with disabilities. I mean, it includes women that are that are pregnant, it includes a wide range of people that would normally be left out of the conversation, left out of hiring and or discriminated against. It also opens up the workplace to be an acceptable place for all these people to be not only accepted, but then feel safe working due to whatever they have going on, right? So that's one thing. I'm also seeing that they use the DEI to perpetuate something that came out of the whole George Floyd thing. Again, when you're in the business of doing business, marketing, anything that society is fixated on, you will see a lot of corporations zoom in on it, act like they're a part of it, pose with solidarity to it. And I think that was something that they used the George Floyd situation for Black Americans all over the world, calling for solidarity from a lot of companies. I mean, they were calling them out on social media. Like, what is your statement? What is your stance? I think when we do stuff like that, it puts us in the position to be fooled. Because an organization can say, I stand with Black people, and can put up some marketing of Black people, and I gave a donation here, and we're like jolly, right? We're jumping up and down. And it's not just for Black people, it's for, the whole Stop Asian Hate thing, all that kind of stuff like that. But when you really look, again, at the business of doing business, when you look at their boards, when you look at their higher, who they have in higher leadership positions, when you look at the pipelines, when you look at who's making the decisions, and also who's in the room when the decision needs to be made, it's never really in alignment with the solidarity that they claim. And so I think this whole Target thing was just that, of them riding the wave. Yes, they opened the door for a lot of Black business owners, yes. I also think with that, though, again, it's just a whole level of doing business where it created access, meaning it created spotlight, but it didn't create full access, like meaning equality. It didn't give them like a hand up, because seeing how everyone started boycotting, then that was a detriment to sales, right? A lot of them couldn't get out of their contracts because of, how contracts are created and how they have to continue to fulfill the terms of their contract. And so there's so many layers and complex to it. I think the CEO stepping down is a strategic move. I also think him stepping down doesn't mean that may have left the company. I think sometimes we see that and think that, oh, they left the company. They might leave that company, but trust me, he's going to another leadership position. It's like he's just being transferred to another probably sector within Target and or a subsidiary or a partner company. So they never really lose their place. I think just with the boycotts and the boycott in general, for me, okay, I'll just say this. So for the boycotts, yes, it may have public helped decrease their sales and things like that. I also know in business, people, you can stretch your numbers, whether low or high. So we don't really know if those reports are as accurate as they say they are. And him stepping down could just be a strategic move to kind of get the backlash off of them. Really, honestly, when society is outraged, you can do something and they'll completely forget about what they were outraged about towards you. And so I'm pretty sure it's just part of one of many strategic moves that Target will do to then, gain their spot back in the hearts of the people, and make amends, right? But doesn't mean that it will facilitate change, doesn't mean that it will create legacy within the Black community. It doesn't mean any of those things, that they're actually in solidarity. Even if there's Black people working there in those positions, they might hire, but it's all really just damage control. It's no shade, because I like shopping at Target for certain things, but that's just how business is done. I'll just talk about the boycott really brief, as brief as I can. it's not that I'm not for boycotts. I feel like they have their place. However, the revelation that I got from boycotting in this day and age, in this modern time, is its ineffectiveness in totality. So what I see what's happening with Target is not a totality thing, right? Because I also, when we talk about being ignorant of how the business of doing business is, Target has partnerships. They have, I don't want to call them legions, but Target has become a brand where it has legions of itself, meaning partnerships, meaning investments in other places and other things. So though you may think that you're boycotting Target and some of these other companies, right, like Amazon and all these places, they have their money elsewhere. Like, these CEOs, these founders, these corporations have their money elsewhere. So you can't really boycott one without boycotting everything, honestly, and really just supporting small business. But even in supporting small business, where these small businesses get their supplies and get the things to function are from these big corporations, because they own the manufacturing, they own all these places, and so their money is spread out and their money is rooted in so many things. So you're only really impacting a small amount, right? And also, because they know that these things occur, they're able to divert your funds elsewhere. So it's really not hitting them. It's not really making a dent. And so that's why I say boycott has its place. But in this modern time, it's ineffective in its totality. When you look at the total picture, when you come out of emotions, because I feel like all of this is rooted in emotions. And I get it. I understand it. But it's so rooted in emotions. Even in politics, it's everyone's reaction is so rooted in emotions. There's a lack of logic, and there's a lack of a bird's eye view, meaning zooming out and looking at the big picture. And looking at the big picture, you have to learn and know the moving parts. You have to know, it's like chess, you have to know the board. You got to know how your opponent is moving, but you have to know the board and what's going on. You have to know who the key players are, where their money is linked to in different places, where their investments are linked. Like, there's a lot going on, and boycotts like Target and Amazon and things like that are just distractions. And the totality of it, it doesn't make a big hit, a dent in what they're doing. And I'll say this. So this is a revelation I got from it. Okay. So we're going to go back, because the boycotts and why people, do them. Boycotts, marching, all that stuff. People do it because they've seen it being done, specifically during the Jim Crow era, right? The civil rights movement. What was done in the civil rights movement in the history, I don't care whose eyes or whose context you're hearing that history from. Like, those boycotts, those marches, those meant something, right? I'm not saying that these boycotts and marches don't, but it meant something, right? It was a time in history that changed everything, right? That changed legislation, that changed laws, that changed rights for people, right? That changed their lives, that changed the aspect of whether they was thriving or surviving, right? And so you think about the bus boycotts, right? And how that completely shut down the transit in the South, in that area that it happened. When you think about, how, just, let's even break that down. So not only did they just not boycott, now mind you, people are still going to work, right? So then they were packing people in cars and carpooling, or people will walk for miles. So there was a high level of inconvenience, right? They inconvenienced themselves greatly. They lived in pain. They lived, not in fear, but they lived in pain. They lived, in ways that were such an inconvenience to them, to what they believe and what they were fighting for. So much so that they'd walk 3 miles or 6 miles total round trip from work on back, even after being on their feet and cleaning people's houses and doing hard labor all day, just so that they wouldn't support something, right? And that changed everything. The marching, the boycotting, like, you know what I mean? MLK, like, all that stuff, that changed something. But you have to understand, so that, in that day, there was a system, right? The system is still the same. I kind of talked about this in one of my live teachings, so I don't remember which one. But there's a system, right? There's a system that's built. The system is still the same. It's been the same system for centuries, right? It just evolves with time. It evolves with time, technology, just people. That's why they study psychology, economics, the way you buy, things like that. So everything just continues to evolve. The system continues to evolve with more information. It continues to evolve. And so I'm like, what happened during the civil rights era where we're like, that worked, right? That worked for that time because, one, there was such a high level of sacrifice, and it wasn't just one person. It was communities. I mean, even down to voting. Like, I had a trip to Louisiana, and like we were talking to some of like the last civil rights people that were there. We met I forgot his name, so forgive me, but we met one of the civil rights leaders. He's still alive today. We met him, and he was just talking. They were counting their stories and things and how they walked. I mean, they put their life. I mean, they died for it. So they put their life on the line. So the boycott wasn't just, oh, this is cute to do. Like, no, they would die for it. You know, if that meant death for them, they would die for it. I mean, there was a level of sacrifice that happened to ensure that everyone voted, to ensure that everyone was on board. I mean, people were in fear of their houses being burnt down, and the community really came together. So there was such a community engagement. People knew their community back then, so everyone knew each other. And even if they didn't, that time created together where they would come together in tiny shacks and houses and backyards. And I mean, you know, 4 or 5 men would go out and pass out things. And I mean, they built a whole system that allowed them to really know each other, to then strengthen that connection and strengthen that bond of trust. That's what we don't have nowadays. For one, that's why the boycotts won't really work in totality. Now, due to that strength and that trust and that community effort, everyone was valued, right? When we talk about everyone being valuable, right? There was someone that knew politics, right? There was people in politics, there was people in economics, there was people in accounting, there were so many people that had different talents, different gifts, different things that they knew, right? That then they brought that, and it was valuable information to the community, to that collective effort. So when I think about you know, for the people that studied the market, I mean, they studied those things and brought that information back. That's something that we don't have, where everyone is valuable, everyone is valued, what they're good in, their expertise, the things that they like and have interest in, watch and learn. That's not valued, right? Even now with the Target boycott, it's like, oh my gosh, if you don't commit or participate, then you're an enemy. That's not how it worked. That's not how it worked. That's not how it worked. And I can't remember his name, but he was telling us, like, yeah, there's people that was scared. There's people that didn't participate, that were like, I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to die. You know what I mean? And they didn't say, oh, well, you're an enemy and you're this. No, they kept working with them. You know what I mean? Like, they kept working. They didn't stop until that person, they gave that person that assurance, like, we're going to protect you, but like, you're not alone. Like, if we all die, you know what I mean? Like, they kept on working with those people until they gave their yes. And even after they gave their yes, they made sure they were protected. They made sure, you know, they walked in groups, came in groups. The men rose up in a way, really protected the women and children and each other. We don't have that. Also, they knew their market. They knew their market. When you talk about that bus system, I think it was in Birmingham, Alabama. I just keep hearing that, so I think that's what it was. When you talk about like that whole bus system, right, and how that ran, they knew that market. They knew that if they boycotted that, what that would do. The thing is, of all the stuff that I mentioned, we don't have. And most of all, we don't know our market. We don't even know our financial position, right? We don't know where we can be, what we can leverage, how to use the money and tools that we have, how to use the resources. Like, we don't know those kind of things. And back then, they knew that. They learned that. That goes back to, like, again, people being valued. So, like, if you knew this or this person knew, like, they listened. They learned. There was deep strategy. It wasn't just till you come to terms, which I've read what they're asking Target for, but it wasn't anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, it was real change, because you might be asking for solidarity, but how are you asking for solidarity for someone who doesn't see you as a person, but yet want the very people that they don't view as humans to be in their stores? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Paying back reparations, okay, but what does that mean? What does that look like? You know what I mean? There's no really strategy in place. And also, it's a whole bunch of people with a lack of knowledge of the market. And I'm not talking about just on the level of doing business. I'm not talking about just researching statistics, because I've been looking at these articles. I've been looking at comments. People are just literally Googling statistics and throwing them in comments to justify their argument. But I'm talking about really knowing the market, really knowing the business of doing business, really knowing, again, the key players, really knowing, like, the money runs deep. First of all, if you haven't followed the money up top, if you have not followed the money will tell you where you're positioned at. The money will tell you everything you need to know. The money will tell you who's connected where. The money will tell you that it's not just Target you should be boycotting, but there's other subsidiaries, there's other companies, there's other corporations that you should be boycotting as well. The money will also tell you that, okay, well, if you do boycott that, then there's risks to that, right? So there needs to be a whole risk assessment. What are the risks to that? Because what other subsidiaries and or corporations is Target connected to? Matter of fact, who not only owns Target, right, as not just a company, or just thinking like it's just one CEO, because the CEO that's appointed doesn't mean that that's the starter, that who started the company. Like, where is the money? Like, follow the money. Follow the money. That will tell you the key players. That will tell you what other industries they're connected to, that then also is connected to the other products and things that you use. Like, there's so many details, right? There's so many details, and there's a lack of strategy. And so that's why I'm saying, like, these boycotts, these marches, absolutely great if getting people together. However, there's a lack of true strategy. There's a lack of true knowing the market, truly knowing how to play up here, because down here is a whole bunch of emotion. And so people are playing games based off their emotions and their perceived assumptions that don't work up here. It's all logic. It's all numbers. Everything is ran by numbers when you get up here. And so if you want to hold someone accountable, if you want to hold these corporations accountable, hold these people in power accountable, you got to know the numbers. You got to have the logic. It can't be deemed off of emotions. And that's all I see is emotions. And people's emotions are running so high that they're, tearing other people down, because they're not boycotting, which I'm like, back then on civil rights, there was a lot of people that was like, I am not willing to die for this. I mean, they even say and have recounted the Underground Railroad, how she was like, either you gonna come or you're gonna die right here, but you ain't going back. You know what I mean? Like, there was people that wanted to turn back. There was people that was like, if I gotta do all this for freedom, baby, I'll just be a slave I'll die as a slave, right? That's what they wanted. That's what they said. That they'd rather die as a slave. Now, I mean, but so there's going to be people that don't believe in it. because there's a level of sacrifice that is painful, that is so inconvenient to really get there. And it's more than a one-time thing. It is a consistent thing. To fight for justice, fight for freedom is a consistent thing. It's a laborious thing. It has so much labor that's not talked about. And then also just the strategy. You have to have the clear strategy in place. You have to really know these things. And if you don't know it, you have to have a group of people that are coming together that truly like cover every sector and everything to really know and to be all in and knowledgeable of what's really going on, to really know your playing field. The thing is like, we on the playground and don't even know the landscape. Like, you don't even know the landscape of the land. You're gonna die. You know what I mean? You don't know the landscape. That's like going to war and not knowing the landscape of your enemies. Not knowing their forests, not knowing, you know, the loopholes, the back doors that they have, not knowing any of that. Like, you will surely perish because you have not studied. You know what I mean? You have not prepared. And so that is what again, this is my perspective on boycotts, and the revelation I got is because there's a lack of preparation. There's a lack of being astute and of studying. There's a lack of community and coming together. There's a lack of sacrifice. There is a lack there's too much convenience with us living in a society where everything is so convenient. To then be inconvenienced in any way is inconvenient and causes strife and division. So, you know what I mean? To really do a boycott, to really have a successful boycott and really make a change in the totality of things, coming up from not just at this level of proximity of what we're seeing, but a bird's eye view, to have that kind of change where you see it moving and the change moving, not just in that industry of Target, in other industries. You know what I mean? Because yeah, Target might be impacted a little bit or a lot, but other industries aren't suffering because of Target. That's why I'm like, there's no totality to it. It's just like, you know, you launch a rocket or a bomb, not a rocket, but like a bomb or something, and it just hits one area and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't bomb the whole city. You know what I mean? You didn't take out a quarter of the nation. You just hit a small little town. that'll eventually rebuild because it's connected to a bigger city that uses its resources. You know what I mean? You didn't take out 3/4 of the world. You didn't take out 3/4 of the industry of the world. You know what I mean? You just took out a mouse who we deem as a giant. And so, yeah, that's why I believe boycotts, marching, all of that stuff is dead. Also, too, in the revelation that I got was also, when you think about, once that happened, once all that stuff in civil rights happened, mind you, they try to be downplaying civil rights. I know they don't want that kind of stuff talked about, but that's because, like, if you think about the civil rights and if people really knew what happened and just like how resilient, how powerful, how united our people were, it's because they don't want an uprising like that again because of the damage that was done. Like, there was yes, people died. A lot of people died. A lot of people were tortured. A lot of people were brutally murdered. I mean, kids, babies, women, men. I mean, a lot of people died, right? But the amount of damage that was done then caused the system and the infrastructure of the system, which people call capitalism, people call patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, right? I just call it the machine. The machine runs everything, right? And the machine has built systems and root systems and infrastructures, right, that are embedded into our society that kind of keep and perpetuate the system going. That keeps the machine going. It's almost like a nucleus. The nucleus is the center. It holds everything. And then has like the offspring things that go out into society. But when you think about that, you think about how they had to retreat, right? They had to make a change. Like, it impacted a lot of things, but also in that they had to retreat, right? So I'm talking about government. I'm talking about people in high places had to retreat, right? They had to think. They had to go into strategy sessions and figure out how they were going to gain power back, because that then empowered our people. And so when you think about hearing about how they like went in and murdered and bombed certain places in the US that were all black cities, you know, wealthy cities, like the Black Wall Street, all of that kind of stuff, that was to elicit power. That was part of a strategy to bring them back under subjection. And so with that, the system had to be restored. It's almost like a virus. You know how you get a virus in your computer, right? And it eats away your system, does all those things, right? And then they have to go in and refresh, like, just, it's almost like that. So that was a virus. What they did was that with those protests, with those marching, with all that stuff, that was a virus that attacked. And that virus made a big impact. And so that system had to go and be worked on, right? They knew what worked. They knew the impact. They knew all the things. So they had to go in and reinforce their system in places. And then start testing it with mini viruses. So I think I was reading an article some years ago, and they were saying how the creator of, I think it's like McAfee, that's like the virus software company, he created like the malware, but he also created the virus as well. And so, and I also read, which I don't know how true that is, but I also read that and heard, even in business school, from people that like worked in like major corporations and things like that, they will hire hackers, right? And hire hackers to hack their system, to know, you know, what are their weaknesses, and to build up a better defense against hacking. And they also do that with viruses too. They'll have them input a virus to see, like, you know, just where they're weak at, right? And build that back up. That's kind of like what was happening. They have noticed a change, you know, the civil rights and all of that stuff that happened, created and showed the weak points, right? Showed where their defenses were down a little bit. So they went and reinforced that. So when a system is created to be a continuation, meaning it never ends, and all it does is reboots itself, and in rebooting itself, it reprograms itself based on the memory of the error and also the solution to then reinforce its defense. You're dealing with a very sophisticated system now. You're no longer dealing with the original system. You're dealing with now more a sophisticated system. And so that's why I'm like, these boycotts and things won't work, because now we're dealing with a more sophisticated system, right? A more modernized system that has not the muscle memory, right? That has the muscle memory of the things that happened and the things that were successful, and the boycotts and the marches and things and other things, right? Infrastructural things that were successful, that they took a big hit from. They still have that muscle memory, right? They also now have solutions and strategies for that to mitigate that. And so then now they've reinforced their borders to where and rebooted themselves back up and rebooted that system to now that kind of stuff can't penetrate the way that it did. Yeah, and civil rights, it took a big hit, right? It packed a big punch, right? It might have knocked them out in some ways, but us doing it now, that's why it's like almost ineffective, or it dies down, right? There's not a immediate result. There's, you know what I mean? Because it's like you can't knock them out in that way again. Like that issue, there's a solution for it now, you know, and that area of defense has been reinstated. It has been reinforced in a way so it won't have the same reaction. It won't, you know, be destroyed. It can still be destroyed, but it won't be destroyed. It won't be taken out in that same way. So you have to have a new strategy. You have to do something new. And I feel like we are doing things of old that worked, that were great for that time. For that time. Also, for that type of system. We don't have that. That system is not the same system we have now. Now, is it the same system as in it's a continuation? Absolutely. But how it's reinforced now, and especially with the data that they have on us now from everything, it's not the same system. Also, we don't really have a sense of community, togetherness, right? In it to the end, to the death of us. Most people aren't fighting for the death of them. Most people aren't sacrificing, willing to put their life on the line. They want to be able to, and I've heard it and seen it in comments. It was like, well, I don't want to put my life on the line. I don't want to die for it. I just want to fight for it and still be able to live it, but I don't want to have to die for it. And that's just not how that works, because there's always casualties in war. I'm just saying, there's just always. But also, yeah, they knew their market. They knew the system. They knew it, front and back. They knew everything. There was a strategy. And we have to come up with new strategies. And I feel like there's too many innovative, there's too many smart people not to have a new strategy. We can't keep using the same weapons, hoping they'd work, and seeing that they don't, and then crying out, expecting for it to work. And why don't you have mercy on me? Like, that's just not how it works. So I see like this Target, the CEO stepping down, is probably all part of a strategic strategy, honestly. I don't see much coming from it, and even whatever comes from it, I still don't see it making a dent or a change in the way that they think, and a change in the way they operate. They just will probably operate a little bit more carefully and tread a little bit more lightly, but they'll still be doing whatever they want to do. It just will be hidden. You know what I mean? All it did was just expose them, and expose them in a way to where they know what to hide and what to show. And so when you don't know and you're not shown, you won't know that it's really going on behind the scenes. They'll just be coddling your emotions. And so, yeah, I think those are my thoughts. But I'm like, we got to stop boycotting. We got to stop marching. There has to be, and if we do that, there has to be strategy. I mean, there has to be order. There has to be knowledge. There has to be preparation. There has to be studying involved. You can't just no longer just show up and participate. Like, no, there has to be order, and there's no order. There's no true strategy. There's a lack of knowing what's going on, knowing how to trade, how to operate this higher level of the business of doing business, of governance, of how these things work. Really reading policies. I mean, even with Trump and things like that, people are outraged about highlights within policies. And I'm not saying that what he's doing is right. I'm just saying, like, did we really read the full executive order? Do we really read and understand the full executive order? Or are we pulling out bits and parts and pieces? Because, the totality part. And then also, even in that, when I look at stuff like that, I look at, okay, if funding is being pulled from this, funding's being pulled from that, that's being cut. My thing is like, okay, then where's the money going? If this was of an interest to the government, and it's no longer an interest of the government due to who's in office, then where has the interest changed? And what is the new set of interests that the government has? Where is that money going? That's what I'm looking at. I am getting and staying informed about all the things, especially how it affects the grant industry and all that kind of stuff like that. But it's like, okay, again, take out the emotion of it because it's business. I think people forget politics is business. It is glorified business with some rules and regulations, but it's glorified business because you need money. You need the exchange of money to be able to govern anything. So it is just business. And so taking out the emotion out of it and looking at, okay, so if this was an interest, if these are the things, and this is no longer an interest, then where do the true interest lies? And also, then where is this money being moved to? Like, what are the clues that they're giving us of like what's to come and kind of how they're kind of shaping and putting things in place? You know, whose ear does he have, right? Whose ear does the president have? That's allowing him to move and make these markers and kind of set up camp, right? And also then who has the president's ear? You know, we're just thinking, you know, locally in the US, I'm thinking international, because I was looking at some of like Trump and how he made his money and stuff, and he makes most of his money internationally. He makes a lot of money internationally. So there's trades, there's, you know, pacts, there's agreements, there's contracts and things like that. And so also, who has the president's ear? You know what I mean? That has him thinking about, yeah, these being moved and that being, you know what I mean? There's just a lot that comes with that. And I think just removing the emotion, looking at it as business, and also then asking the deeper questions, looking for strategy. Most people don't look for strategy. We just look at choices and then judge choices. But behind every choice, there's a strategy. There's an intention. You know what I mean? It goes back to everything has a root, has an origin, and an intention in which it was made. And because there's an intention, then that thing will perform the very thing that it was intended to do. Yeah, so I don't even know how I got on all of that. I mean, just flowing. But that's a lot of the current events and things that are going on. I have been just keeping up to date with the things that are going on, even in terms of fashion, where like a lot of these fashion houses, a lot of luxury brands and things like that are being connected to sweatshops and things like that in Italy, in other places, the sustainability, and I know Shein and some other fast fashion are looking to implement sustainable like supply chains, and like, you know, which I don't understand like how that's gonna, people are like, oh, this is great. I just don't understand how that works. If you create trash and you know you're using low quality fabrics, mixed fibers that are deep within chemicals, and also then using child labor, are not following labor laws, harsh conditions for people that are making the clothes, like there's just so many red flags. How can you then say that you're making your clothes sustainable when there's nothing sustainable about your clothes? There's nothing. There's no part of how you make your clothes that's sustainable. Polyester is not sustainable. So you establishing a recycling program to be able to recycle polyester when people that truly know that polyester can never be recycled, it's just crazy to me. But it's just like the greenwashing. But when you have that buyer power and they have the market, and so they have the ears and the eyes of the people, and so you have that power and influence, you can kind of do those kind of things. So yeah, it's just been a lot of researching, a lot of looking at what people are doing. There's a lot of people doing innovative things. There's a lot of research, especially in sustainability for textiles, and just because it's not just textiles. A lot of what we do also comes from the earth as well. So it's sustainability within the earth, within agriculture. It has so many industries that sustainability touches outside of fashion. And so seeing like people reading their articles, reading their research, like just cool, innovative things that they're doing, is good to see people's imagination, but also like innovation and creativity coming together. Councils, seeing international governance specifically, standing up, taking a stand, and declaring and asking for accountability for certain things that are going on in the textile and fast fashion industry. And so yeah, it's an amazing thing. I guess we'll just see like with the tariffs and things, because that plays a big role, and also fashion, that plays a big role in every industry, every business. So just seeing how all that stuff will play out going forward. But one thing for sure that I know even now, and with my consulting firm that I do, because the work that I do in my consulting firm aligns with this business as well. It's a racial equity and justice consulting firm, and so we deal with all of everything and the nuances and layers that's inclusive of all of that, and then justice through every lens, and not just racial justice, and social justice, environmental justice, all those things. And so what I'm seeing in terms of, you know, the executive orders and the grants and the funding, and how that impacts philanthropy, and how that impacts the work that nonprofits do and other organizations, and just seeing the mess. I'm also seeing like the terror, the fear, the stagnation of like people not moving forward because they're waiting to hear, you know, what the White House is going to say, right? What legislation, what things are going to be impacted, right? But all I can think about is like going back to what I said about strategy. Just need a strategy. And we have so many beautiful minds, so many creative people, so many people gifted, that if we truly knew who we were in community with, if we truly knew who we were in community with, and do life with, and do work with, and do church with, and do hobbies and sports with, if we truly knew the people around us, I think that we could come together in a way that we wouldn't need the government. We wouldn't need these outside sources for finances and stuff, because there is finances around us. Everyone is not struggling. There is people that have acquired funds and that are at a certain economic and tax bracket, to put it more plainly, that are using their funds for good, and looking for ways to be an advocate if they can't give of their time, to give of their resources. And so I think, you know, what we need to do is really come together, community, and not just because something made us mad, not because it's out of emotions or it's because that's not right. We have to think more than this is just not right, because that's rooted in emotion. Yes, it's rooted in morality as well, but more so rooted in emotion when we talk about the end result of like what we're going to do, our action. But it has to be very strategic, it has to be very logical. You can't have emotions in this kind of things, because your emotions get in the way, and you end up making decisions based off emotions, and miss the logical context and nuances that aren't necessarily shown when you are in an emotional state. And so yeah, I kind of like this current events update live teaching. It's refreshing. It's kind of like a cleansing the palate, you know, because I've thrown some pretty deep live teachings on the page, and so this is kind of like a sit down. I do plan to do more of these. I do have like other live teachings and things that are scheduled. As of right now, the schedule is looking like bi-weekly live teachings. I also do have content. So the content that you see on the page associates with the live teaching that will be for that week. And so I do have the content that's up now on the page, and it is in connection to what we've talked about today in current events. Let me just kind of pull that up real fast. Yeah, so we talked about I just posted a post about style suppression. So let me start at the beginning. So let me go to Notion because I can't even think off the top of my head right now. So we'll start with Monday. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. I was like, oh, where did that go? Okay, so Monday we talked about the struggles with modesty, right? Because we just came off the modesty Q&A, so kind of like merging into that again with current events, because the things that are going on are all also due to points of views, opinions that are impacting industries, that are impacting just everything that's going on, right? What people think about slave labor, what people think about child labor, illegal child labor, what people think about, and like the governance surrounding that. And so also within that, when you think about the clothes and how they're made, there is a struggle with modesty, with two ends where you have people that are for it and people that are against it, right? And they all have their each reason of why they think that their side should be right? So it's almost like a tug of war going on. And from that, it also kind of ties into the facilitation with fast fashion and the issues with fast fashion. Because let me tell you, everything that's made fast fashion ain't nothing modest about it. Let's just be real there. But also in just the issues with fast fashion, we talked about the landfills, right? Being able to see not only this tug of war that's going on. And it doesn't even have to be, and really the tug of war is like people in position and then like those of society. And of course both sides encompass society, but you're really seeing the struggle within society of the two sides playing a tug of war, right? Each trying to overpower the other, to gain that power and authority, and what that also looks like with fast fashion, right? And learning about the landfills and the locations, and seeing just these areas in the world that are completely it just made my heart, like, it made my blood boil, and it made me feel some type of way, because I was like, when I heard about landfills, but when I saw some of these places, and then you see the children, you see the locals, where that's their economy, like, because the landfills because they make money they make billions of dollars off of it. So the government, the middlemen, people selling it from the donation centers, they're making billions of dollars off of this junk being discarded in parts of countries, where then the locals, where it's really eroding and causing to where they don't have any other industry. So they were saying, like, in some of these, like, they don't have the infrastructure, right? We talked about the economics and the infrastructure needed to really have a textile community, but also like a textile industry. So they're having to rely on secondhand, and them using secondhand clothes, meaning clothes that we don't use, we maybe wear once and throw away, or just don't wear at all. They come in any kind of condition, they use that and resell that back. But that's usually the only industry of them being able to really make money, because of the landfills, because of the other things of corruption that are happening in these countries. They don't have the infrastructure for true workforce development. So that's their own workforce development. Then it kind of ties into all of these things, right? Kind of interconnected and ties into like style suppression and what that looks like. Kind of goes back to like the struggle with modesty, but then also like the fast fashion, the issues with fast fashion, how that then all works together to kind of suppress our style, right? When you think about fast fashion, we think about trends and how clothes are made based on trends, right? There's a certain way you dress, there's a certain way you look, and you think about that also in the scheme of like jobs and other areas of employment, organizations where you might reside. There's a certain way you have to look and function And it's all breaded from the industry and its perspective on what's in, what's not. And then also just the beauty we miss in the context of conformity. So when we are so inundated with conformity, conforming to fast fashion, conforming to the trends of fast fashion, conforming to the destruction of fast fashion, conforming to the views and things of others, of modesty, of all these things, right? Even of dupe culture, of legally stealing, and recreating, and selling. There's a suppression that comes, suppression of like who you are, the colors, the textures of our world, the beauty of our world, is being suppressed in a way. And so that's another thing. I will upload a post about dupe culture and then re-upload this update of current events with a recap. But yeah, so each week there are content that kind of leads up to the live teaching that's related to the live teaching in some way. So it kind of just builds the momentum until the day of the live teaching. So yeah, I'm excited. This has been fun. Again, I didn't know what I was gonna say. I did not have anything. Normally I do have things planned, but I just not have anything planned. So I guess it was, befitting for me to just flow like this. And so I'm glad, I'm excited. There are a lot of things going on. We'll continue our live teachings bi-weekly. So I won't see you next week, but I'll see you the following week. Actually, I'm sorry. I will see you in 3 weeks. Not next week and not the week of the 1st for September. I will see you September 12th. So yeah, the next live teaching will be on September 12th. So as always, this is fun. You can check out any of the other live teachings if you're interested in those. They'll be in the video or live, the videos tab, but then also you can just scroll down on our feed, check those out, like and subscribe, also comment some things you might have learned and or your opinions. Also follow us on Instagram, and also you can check and also watch this live teaching or replay the live teaching on the YouTube channel. All that will be linked in the comment section. This has been a fun evening of teaching, discussion, and I will see you in 3 weeks. Bye.